Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Ohio. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. The year was 1910, and the village of Waynesfield sat quietly between the flat farmlands and creeks of northwestern Ohio. Its fields stretched endlessly, touched only by the hum of insects and the slow creak of wagon wheels. The townspeople lived modest lives, grain merchants, carpenters, and the few who tended the cemetery on the edge of town. Among them were Harold and Eleanor Whitby, a couple recently moved from Marion County. No one had reason to doubt them, though some found their manner peculiar. Formal, almost too polite for rural company. Harold had taken work maintaining the church grounds, while Eleanor was said to keep to herself, venturing out only to gather flowers from the burial plots for their small rented home. According to county registries, they arrived in Waynesfield the previous autumn, leasing a house known locally as the Henders Farmstead, abandoned after its owner passed suddenly the year before. That property carried its own small legend. The widow's body, they said, had been left unembalmed for days during a winter freeze, delaying burial. It was only a rumor until the Whitbys arrived, and the tale began to spread again. The first oddity came in April, when the sexton, Milton Carr, noted disturbed soil near a new grave. It wasn't theft. Nothing was missing. But the ground looked reopened and pressed down again by boot heels. He mentioned it to Harold, assuming it was an animal. Harold agreed too quickly. Within a week, children playing near the cemetery fence swore they saw a lantern moving between the headstones late at night. One claimed it was a woman's, figure holding flowers. Such stories traveled fast in small towns, and though no one accused anyone directly, whispers found their way to the Whitbys. "It is unholy to linger among the dead," Reverend Clancy said from the pulpit, though he never named names. By midsummer, the town grew uneasy. Letters to the county office referenced disturbances of graves and possible desecration. These records, preserved today only as partial scans, describe shallow impressions of hands in the soil near certain headstones and candle wax traces found in the grass. Sheriff Darnell, unsure whether to treat it as vandalism or something stranger, questioned Harold. The man's response was recorded in the constable's ledger. "The earth breathes, sir. It's not always done with what it's been given." The phrase disturbed even the most patient lawmen. One deputy, later interviewed by the Lima Courier, remarked, "I believe he meant that graves are living things." When we look back through later state archives, the mention of this couple often appears beside the earliest recorded notes on grave tampering in the region, decades before the Cleveland torso cases that would make Ohio infamous for body mutilations. But in 1910, no one had words for what was beginning to unfold among the Whitbys and the quiet soil they tended. As summer deepened, Waynesfield's air grew thick with the smell of earth and rain. Farmers spoke of rot in the low fields, and the cemetery seemed to breathe it most. Milton Carr, the old sexton, began keeping a small notebook after he found his lantern stolen twice. In his writing, preserved in a faded county file, he noted that each theft happened near midnight, always on a Friday. He stopped leaving the lantern by the gate, though he continued his nightly rounds. One night in August, Milton wrote that he saw a man kneeling by the second row beyond the oak, muttering over the soil as if reciting a prayer. He recognized Harold's coat, but what froze him was Eleanor's voice from somewhere unseen, soft, rhythmic, and wrong. He did not return to the cemetery that month. Instead, he sent word to Sheriff Darnell. The sheriff visited the Whitbys' home at dawn. Eleanor answered the door with her hair unpinned, eyes dark from sleeplessness. She explained that her husband suffered episodes of melancholy and often wandered by moonlight to think. The sheriff noted in his report that the home smelled of flowers and something faintly chemical. He found on a side table a small metal box containing folded notes. Each paper bore the same message in Harold's hand: "The grave remembers." By September, church attendance dwindled. Some locals moved livestock away from the fence line bordering the cemetery, claiming the animals grew restless after dark. The local doctor, Amos Brill, treated Eleanor once for what he called a collapse of nerves. She spoke of dreams, filled with whispering voices that rose from the ground. Dr. Brill suggested rest and prescribed laudanum, though later correspondence hints she never took it. In the town ledger that autumn, a short entry appears beside the Whitbys' names. Unpaid rental, Hender's farmstead. Property inspection delayed. Odor reported. The owner's nephew, Henry Dobson, was sent to collect rent. His affidavit, written years later, describes entering the house through a partly open door. Inside, the parlor was neat, though the fireplace had been bricked over. A single window was curtained with black cloth. In the rear room, he found Harold sitting motionless beside an arrangement of dried lilies placed in a small mound of soil on the floor. "Eleanor sleeps," Harold reportedly said. When Dobson asked where she was, Harold only gestured toward the cemetery hill beyond the window. Sheriff Darnell returned that evening with Reverend Clancy and 2 townsmen. They searched the cemetery under lantern light and found one grave newly disturbed, the stone belonging to a young girl, Martha Hollis, buried 2 years earlier. The coffin had been partly lifted, the lid cracked. Inside lay Eleanor, dead perhaps a day, positioned as if embracing the child's remains. The sheriff's report called it a burial inversion. Harold was nowhere to be found. They sealed the grave by morning, and the Whitby name was struck from local records. Yet in county papers, a single note in the margin survived. Man seen walking north toward the creek, coat torn, humming low. The whispers of the Whitby case would not die with Eleanor. They would spread quietly, infecting the folklore of neighboring towns, an echo that would later remind investigators of the darker Ohio legends, like the dismemberments decades later that the Cleveland torso murderer made infamous. For weeks after the discovery, the cemetery was sealed by the sheriff's order. Reverend Clancy oversaw the reburial of Eleanor and the child, though no record states exactly how the two were separated. Some say they were not. A brief notice in the Lima Courier read, "Wife found interred amid prior remains. Husband fled north. Investigation pending." The story was buried as quietly as the dead. Yet in the months that followed, odd reports surfaced from the edges of Allen County. Farmers seeing a man in a long coat walking along the tracks near Indian Lake, others finding footprints by abandoned barns where lantern soot marked the walls. Sheriff Darnell sent circulars to nearby towns describing Harold Whitby. Age 37, thin build, spectacles, right hand burned by acid. No capture followed. County ledgers from 1911 show only that the Henders farmstead was reclaimed by its owner's kin and later sold to a family from Bellefontaine. They tore down the bricked fireplace and found beneath it a shallow compartment containing soil, dried petals, and 3 brass nameplates taken from graves. A clerk named Ruth Edens, who catalogued the items, wrote a private note. Each plate had been polished recently, edges warm to touch. She resigned within the year and later moved to Toledo. Decades later, a professor of criminology at Ohio State, Dr. Llewellyn Hart, examined the Whitby documents for a lecture on early American necrophilic cases. He mentioned that Ohio had a history of corporeal fixation, citing the early accounts of grave interference preceding modern serial patterns, referencing what would, years later, echo through the case of the Cleveland torso murderer. In his talk, Hart described Harold Whitby as a transitional figure between grief and violation, between loss and possession. He based this on letters exchanged between Reverend Clancy and Dr. Brill, both now preserved in the county archives. The letters reveal that Harold had once written to the Reverend seeking theological counsel. "If the soul clings, must not the body wait?" There was no reply. By 1912, the farmstead had burned. The fire, documented in the township's insurance files, was deemed accidental, though no lightning had been recorded. Children later scavenged through the ashes, claiming to find melted glass and charred flower stems. Old Milton Carr, the sexton who had first suspected trouble, was said to have left town the same year. His descendants would tell that he never entered a cemetery again. In nearby Lima, an asylum ledger lists a patient admitted under the name Harlan Whitby, a variation so close that later historians debated whether it was Harold under disguise. The man was described as mute, fixated on soil, and unresponsive except when placed near window light. He died in 1914 and was buried anonymously on the asylum grounds. If it was him, the case ended quietly. But the soil near Waynesfield would not stay quiet. Farmers plowing close to the cemetery in 1915 began reporting that their plows caught on old wooden boxes, small, crude coffers filled with dried flowers, hair ribbons, and fragments of glass labeled with initials scratched by hand. When the county collected these items, the record keeper noted, "Perhaps offerings, perhaps something older." No one went near the Henders field after sunset. By the winter of 1915, the Henders field had turned to mud and ash. The snow melted into dark puddles where the farmhouse once stood. Locals said the ground there steamed at night, though likely it was only warmth escaping from decaying wood and buried debris. Still, people crossed themselves when passing. The township finally fenced off the area and posted a small wooden sign, "Unsafe terrain, no trespass." Yet the strange incidents did not cease. A letter found in the county office, dated February 1916, from a new groundsman named Ernest Klein, mentions hearing soft rustling as if someone sifting soil with bare hands. Klein's handwriting trembles near the end of his note, as if the page were written in haste. He requested transfer within the month and was granted it. A replacement was never hired. The following spring, a traveling photographer named Julian Rowe came through Waynesfield offering portraits for a few cents apiece. He made camp near the graveyard, unaware of its history. His surviving negatives, discovered decades later by collectors, include a peculiar image, a blurred shape behind a tree line, faintly resembling a figure stooped low, one hand reaching toward the earth. The photo was dismissed as a double exposure, yet it revived old talk among the elders. When interviewed in 1938 by a Works Progress Administration historian, Mrs. Ada Forney recalled that her grandmother used to warn children, "Don't play near Hender's ground. The dirt there has memory." Around the same period, newspapers in Toledo and Lima carried brief notes of grave disturbances in nearby counties. Some officials speculated that a drifter or cult was responsible, but no connection was proven. The sheriff's reports of that time echo earlier ones in both tone and confusion. Soil displaced, flowers uprooted, no theft observed, always the same phrases. When Dr. Hart revisited the Whitby materials for his later publication, he wrote that the case stood between pathology and folklore, an uneasy space also evident in the later Cleveland torso crimes that horrified the state in the 1930s. He proposed that rural Ohio's long history of unmarked burials and poor record-keeping allowed such legends to persist. But local oral tradition told it differently. Old residents claimed that Harold Whitby's obsession had taken root, that the ground itself continued his devotion long after his body was gone. In one account recorded by Reverend Clancy's successor, the Reverend Allen Trow, a woman named Lida Sprague confessed to seeing a man by the cemetery wall in 1917. He was described as gaunt, coat torn, eyes sunk deep, humming as if to a lullaby. She swore it was Harold, though he would have been dead if the asylum record were true. The sheriff dismissed her story, yet her testimony remained in the file. By 1920, most who remembered the couple were gone or had moved away. Only the graveyard endured, its grass high, stones worn smooth, the soil uneven as though still shifting beneath. Those who walked there spoke of a faint smell of lilies when the wind changed. The records from 1921 mention a final attempt to clear the cemetery hill for expansion. The county planned to relocate several graves to a new municipal plot closer to town, but the laborers refused after the first day. The foreman, George Tibbett, filed an incident report that survives in brittle form. He wrote, "The men unearthed portions of coffinwood, blackened but not decayed, and an odor like rot and rosewater. Beneath one section, we struck glass. Inside were ribbons, petals, and something like hair tied with wire." Tibbett concluded the work was abandoned due to nervous temperament among staff. He later moved to Dayton and never spoke publicly about it. But in a letter to his brother, now archived with the Township Historical Society, he wrote, "They said she was still holding someone's hand." By then, the story of the Whitbys had blended into rural myth. Schoolchildren dared each other to approach the Henders fence after dark. Travelers passing through noted the strange quiet there, the absence of crickets, the way fog seemed to cling longer to that field. One night in late autumn of 1922, a freight conductor reported seeing a dim lantern waving near the cemetery crossing. He thought it was a signalman until the light moved against the wind. No body was found when the train halted. The conductor's statement, though brief, echoed Milton Carr's old account from 12 years before. It was as if the pattern repeated itself. Dr. Hart's later research observed that such cyclical behaviors were typical in folklore that evolved from a single trauma. In his 1940 paper, he compared it to psychological haunting, a term borrowed from his study of the Cleveland torso case, where memory and fear mingled until fact became indistinguishable from story. But the Whitby file remained quieter, almost respectful, as though officials themselves wished not to stir it. Reverend T. Rao continued to keep the old church near the cemetery, and though attendance dwindled, he refused to move it. In his notes from 1923, he described seeing a man by the old oak near sunset, hatless, watching the graves. When approached, he vanished among the stones. He believed it was an echo of Harold, or perhaps someone who shared his grief. The dead, he wrote, always have listeners. By 1925, the parish closed. The last burial recorded at the site was a stillborn child, laid to rest on a cold March morning. No one noticed that the grave sank faster than others. Years later, during drought, the soil above that spot cracked open, and neighbors said they saw pale flowers blooming from the fissure, though the ground had been barren for years. Whether truth or imagination, those who lived near the old field spoke of the air changing when storms rolled in, an odor like lilies mixed with iron. Some swore they heard faint humming carried by the wind, rising and falling like a voice speaking to the soil itself, as if someone were still waiting to be answered. By 1926, the county surveyors returned to mark the land for a new road connecting Waynesfield to Lima. Their maps show a faint boundary line skirting the Henders property, carefully avoiding the old graves. One of the survey team, a man named Walter Dunn, wrote to his wife that the compass needle quivered near that ground as if unsure of north. His letter, preserved by descendants, mentions that the soil there was softer than the surrounding field, though no rain had fallen for days. "It's as though something beneath keeps breathing," he wrote. When Dunn's superior reviewed the site weeks later, he found nothing unusual and dismissed the account. Yet, local farmhands hired for clearing spoke of unease. A laborer named Finn Riker claimed to have found a half-buried metal locket etched with the initials E.W. It contained a faded photograph of a woman holding a bouquet of lilies, Eleanor Whitby, though none of the men recognized her. The item was turned over to the township office, then lost in storage. Around the same time, an itinerant preacher traveling through the county delivered a sermon on the bondage of love after death. Notes in the church bulletin suggest he had been told of the Whitby case by Reverend Trow, who was now elderly and infirm. Trow himself died that winter, leaving behind journals filled with cryptic reflections. One passage reads, "If grief be a root, then its fruit is silence, and from silence a face may grow." A chilling sentence, though scholars later debated whether it was theological metaphor. In 1927, a small article appeared in the Lima Republican Gazette reporting unearthed relics near the abandoned cemetery after a storm uprooted an old tree. Beneath the roots, workers found fragments of glass jars and several hand-cut wooden figures wrapped in cloth, each marked with the same scratched initials, H.W. Dr. Hart, reviewing these not in, as decades later, considered them evidence of posthumous cult activity, writing that folklore often fills the vacuum left by vanished truth. He drew a line between such relics and the later fascination Ohioans had with body preservation, a theme haunting the state's darker cases like the Cleveland torso discoveries. To the people of Waynesfield, however, The jars and carvings were proof that the Whitby's bond had never decayed. A surviving account from an old woman named Clara Raines recalls that her father, one of the storm cleanup crew, refused to bring his tools home after that job, fearing the dirt might remember his touch. By 1929, vegetation had overtaken the Henders lot entirely. Children who wandered too close claimed to see footprints in the grass, though no person passed by. The scent of lilies returned each spring, strongest on rainless nights. Neighbors said it drifted in from nowhere, carrying with it a chill, as though the earth itself exhaled. When the Depression struck, the project to extend the road was abandoned. The fences rotted, the signs fell, and the story of Harold and Eleanor became one more whispered warning. A love so strong it outlived breath, turning soil and memory into one. Those who told it spoke quietly, as if sound itself might stir the ground again. When the 1930s arrived, the town of Waynesfield seemed to have forgotten its own legend, though the land had not. A new generation farmed near the cemetery's edge, their children playing among the sunken stones, without understanding whose names they once bore. Yet, in the summer of 1933, a traveling WPA survey team cataloging rural architecture stumbled upon the remains of the Henders House foundations. The report described discolored brick, unusually soft under hammer, faint scent of florals despite exposure. The entry might have gone unnoticed, if not for a penciled addition made by one of the workers. Heard woman's voice humming. The survey was completed, and the crew moved on, but the note lingered in the margin. Around that same year, several livestock deaths occurred along the creek nearby. Locals attributed it to poor feed or bad water, but an elderly farmer, Ezra Wiles, told a reporter from the Lima News that he'd seen a man at dusk, stooped in the reeds, holding something white like a flower. The story was printed once and never followed up. Still, it spread just as the older townsfolk began dying off, leaving only fragments of memory behind. In 1935, Dr. Hart, revisiting the Whitby papers for his criminology study, remarked that the case exemplified ritualistic fixation upon decay as an act of devotion. He used the Whitby material to illustrate early 20th century necromantic folklore in the Midwest, just as the Cleveland torso killings made Ohio again synonymous with the macabre. Though Hart never claimed a connection, his papers caused renewed interest in the Waynesfield mystery. That same year, 2 graduate researchers from Columbus visited the site. Their notes, recovered from university storage decades later, detail their unease. Faint singing from field, impossible to locate. Soil warm underfoot, temperature mild. Ground emits faint sweet odor. They collected soil samples, which were later misplaced, and took one photograph of the overgrown lot. The image shows nothing distinct, only blurred grass and the silhouette of a tree at the horizon. Yet beneath the brushstroke blur, one can just discern a human shape beside the trunk, as though someone peered from behind it. When shown the photo, locals said it was just the wind bending a branch. By 1937, a plan emerged to clear the land for grazing. Workers cut down the outer hedges and dug drainage trenches. Within a week, one of the men, Lester Myrick, was hospitalized after what the foreman called a nervous collapse. In the asylum log, his statement reads, "They're lying together, under the lilies. He's still digging. She's waiting." Myrick was released months later but never spoke of that field again. Dr. Hart's correspondence near the end of that decade suggests he wanted to revisit Waynesfield for his final study but died before arranging the trip. His last notebook ends with a line underlined twice. "Love embalmed becomes the soil." It was a phrase that might have fit the Whitby case better than any medical description. 2 lives, joined in devotion, preserved by earth and rumor, until no one could tell which had buried the other. By the early 1940s, Waynesfield's population had shrunk to half its former size. War and industry pulled the young away, leaving behind only the aging and the land itself. The old cemetery, forgotten by county maintenance, had become a tangle of weeds and saplings. The Henders field, lying just beyond its boundary, was now thick with milkweed and briar. Only a narrow path remained where a fence once stood. leading to the hollow where the Whitby house had burned. The place looked harmless by daylight, grass silver under the morning dew, wind rippling softly through. But at night, travelers along the nearby road claimed to see a lantern flickering deep in the brush. In one affidavit written by a truck driver, Leonard Poole, dated October 1942, he describes halting his vehicle after spotting a dim yellow glow moving slow and steady, not swinging like someone walking, but fixed. When he stepped closer, the light vanished, and the smell of flowers, fresh cut like at a funeral, hung in the cold air. His account was sent to the county sheriff, who filed it without comment. That same winter, a historian from Bowling Green State University, Eleanor Briggs, corresponded with local archives about the Whitby legend. Her letters show a mix of skepticism and fascination. The records are incomplete, but what remains paints a portrait of pathological mourning, what we would now call obsessive grief behavior. Yet even in absence of evidence, locals continue to speak of the field as if it breathes. She was granted access to the remaining Whitby artifacts, what few had survived, and reportedly kept a piece of melted glass said to come from the burned hearth. In her private notebook she wrote, "The glass fogs when held, as though retaining warmth." That line has troubled researchers ever since. During the war years, several new families settled near the outskirts of Waynesfield. Wren played among the ruins, bringing home wildflowers that grew where the house once stood. Their parents noticed that the flowers, once plucked, wilted within minutes, turning black at the edges. One mother wrote to the local newspaper, asking if the soil contained toxins. There was no reply. By 1946, the town's council officially removed the old cemetery from tax rolls, labeling it unused ground. No one objected. Yet even stripped from record, the site seemed to persist in quiet ways. Mail carriers reported that the grass along the Henders Lane never froze, even in hard winter. Hunters passing through claimed their dogs refused to enter the field, and every spring lilies continued to grow there, though no one had planted them for decades. By the end of that decade, the Whitby name had all but disappeared from living memory. Only the old county files, the brief mention in Dr. Hart's criminology paper, and Eleanor Briggs's unpublished notes kept the story alive, buried deep, like the couple themselves, beneath layers of soil and silence. Those who still spoke of them said the lantern light could still be seen before storms, moving slowly between the trees, always stopping where the graves once lay, as if someone was still keeping watch. In the early 1950s, an effort began to modernize the county's record system. Old case files were transferred from paper to microfilm, and with them came the surviving fragments of the Whitby investigation. Most clerks treated the documents as curiosities from another era, handwritten ledgers, brittle affidavits, water-stained signatures. But one archivist, Samuel Hargreaves, took particular interest. In an internal memo from 1952, he wrote, "Many of these files were catalogued out of sequence. One box labeled 1910, 1913, Cemetery's Property, contained a sealed envelope addressed to the sheriff. It bore the initials H.W. Inside, he found a small pressed flower, a photograph of a woman's hand holding a ring, and a note written in faint pencil. 'We are nearly whole.' Hargreaves documented the find, then placed the items in storage. Within weeks, the envelope vanished. He later told a colleague that he must have misfiled it, though his personal journal suggests otherwise. 'The scent of lilies,' he wrote, 'lingers on my gloves.' Around the same period, highway construction brought surveyors back to Waynesfield. They noted remnants of stone foundations and what they called subsidence zones, patches where the ground had caved slightly, as if air had escaped from below. One photograph shows a distinct depression shaped like a narrow oval, about the size of a coffin. The engineers filled it with gravel and built over it without ceremony. In 1955, an anonymous article appeared in a regional history magazine titled "The Lovers Beneath the Earth." It retold the Whitby legend as local folklore, adding fictional embellishments, a weeping woman at the window, a man who refused to let his wife's body cool. Readers sent letters claiming their grandparents had witnessed lanterns near the field, or that their dogs would bark toward it every spring. None of this could be verified, yet too. Legend found new life. Professor Eleanor Briggs, now teaching at Oberlin, revisited her earlier notes and corresponded with the magazine editor, urging restraint. "My concern," she wrote, "is not the embellishment, but the misunderstanding. These were not monsters, but mourners who could not let go." Her letter was never published. When she died in 1957, her effects were boxed for donation to the university. Among them was the piece of melted glass she had kept. Students handling her estate later described a faint perfume escaping from the crate, like funeral flowers after rain. No analysis was ever made. Meanwhile, Waynesfield continued to decline. The highway bypass left it isolated. Businesses shuttered, and the population dwindled to fewer than 200. Only the land remained constant. Travelers who stopped along the new road sometimes reported glimpsing a flicker of light deep in the fields at night. Most ignored it. A few approached, saying it vanished just beyond reach, leaving only disturbed soil and the smell of lilies. The state survey maps never noted those lights, but locals swore that where they appeared, grass refused to grow for months after. By 1961, the County Historical Society began a project to preserve oral histories from small Ohio towns, and Waynesfield was among them. Interviewers found only a few elderly residents who remembered the Whitby name. One of them, a man named Clyde Dobson, the nephew of the property's original owner, recounted the day he'd first entered the Henders farmhouse half a century earlier. His voice, captured on the reel-to-reel tape, trembled as he said, "There was no smell of death, just soil and flowers, like someone had brought the cemetery indoors." When asked what he believed happened to Harold, Dobson paused for several seconds before answering. He stayed. The interviewer pressed him to clarify, but he repeated it softly. He stayed. The transcript ends there. Around the same year, the local paper published an anniversary feature titled "Vanished in Waynesfield, 50 Years Later." The article reopened public curiosity, briefly reanimating a case that had long been dust. Reporters searched county archives, finding only fragments: a blurred photograph of Eleanor's face from a church registry, a sketch of the Henders property, and one surviving piece of evidence, a brass nameplate engraved Martha Hollis. It had tarnished almost black. When displayed at the courthouse for the article, the plate emitted a faint odor of lilies that the clerk could not explain. Visitors came to see it out of morbid interest, until officials quietly removed it, claiming humidity damage. In that same period, a new generation of criminologists began linking forgotten rural cases to the evolution of what they called ritualized mourning pathology. Among them was Dr. Leon Pratt, a student of the late Dr. Hart, who referenced the Whitby material as a preface to obsession-driven exhumation. Pratt visited the site personally in 1963. His field notes described the land as strangely undisturbed, each air still, the earth soft as though recently turned. He collected soil and pressed flowers from the field for analysis, but no report was ever published. He died in an automobile accident 2 years later. The samples disappeared with him. During this era, people in neighboring towns began to call the area the Lover's Hollow. Teenagers dared each other to walk its edge at night. One story told of a boy who brought a lily from the field home to his mother's vase. By morning, it had withered into ash. Parents forbade their children to go near the place, though the prohibition only deepened its legend. Occasionally, travelers stopped along the highway to take photographs of the abandoned land. Some images survive: empty field, lone tree, faint suggestion of something pale near the trunk. One investigator decades later enhanced those photos digitally and claimed to see the outline of a face in the shadows. Experts dismissed it as artifact distortion. Yet those familiar with the story said it looked like Harold, still watching from behind the tree where his wife had once stood among the graves. In the early 1970s, the legend of the grave lovers experienced an unexpected revival through an Ohio folklore project funded by a state university. Graduate researcher Miriam Cates was assigned to compile regional ghost stories and local myths. Among her notes survives a field report dated 1972. Locals refer to the Henders site as the waiting field. Older residents claim the ground sings after rain, a low tone like humming. She recorded interviews with 4 surviving townspeople. One, an old mail carrier named Ira Bowers, claimed that his father had delivered letters to the Whitbys. He said the husband talked gentle, like a teacher, but his eyes were elsewhere, watching the dirt while he spoke. Another informant, Ruth Dobson, recalled her grandmother's warning that the soil under that house was still counting heartbeats. Cates found little tangible evidence, but collected numerous patterns of description: smells, sounds, the recurring motif of lilies. She concluded that the Whitby story had crossed the boundary between record and reverence, living on not as fear, but as ritual memory. When she sent her findings to the Ohio Folklore Review, the editors rejected the piece, calling it too bleak. Cates later published a small pamphlet privately. In it she mentioned Dr. Hart's earlier criminological work, noting how the Whitby case prefigured later fascination with preservation and dismemberment, such as that which haunted Ohio in the Cleveland torso murders. She saw both as expressions of intimacy with decay. The pamphlet circulated quietly among historians, but gained cult status among readers of the macabre. Copies occasionally appear in estate sales, pages stained with age. Around that same time, locals reported minor disturbances, small holes in the ground appearing overnight, soil damp without rain, and scattered patches of lilies blooming out of season. The farmer told Cates that he'd seen a figure near the old tree line, head bent, like someone listening to the ground. He refused to return to the field. By the mid-1970s, the county briefly considered paving the area for storage lots, but abandoned the plan when the soil failed compaction tests. The report noted inexplicable subsurface shifting. It was as if the ground would not bear the weight. A local journalist, fascinated by Cates's findings, visited the field in 1978. His notes survive in the Lima Evening Journal archives. He wrote, "The air turns colder 5 paces in, birds stop singing, you feel observed, not by a person but by the place." He left a single lily at the center of the field before departing. Weeks later, vandals set a fire near the boundary. It burned half the brush but left one patch untouched, the area where the lily had been placed. Firemen reported a strange scent lingering in the smoke, sweet like flowers and damp stone. By 1981, what little remained of the Whitby records had become a curiosity for amateur historians and late-night radio hosts. A program out of Columbus aired a segment titled Ohio's Sleeping Fields, blending fact and fiction in equal measure. Callers phoned in claiming to have driven past Waynesfield and seen 2 faint shapes in the distance, one standing, one bent toward the ground. The host laughed it off, though a letter received days later from a listener described the same vision. The letter read, "The standing man looked toward me, then the light in my car flickered and I smelled lilies." Authorities never followed up. The county itself was changing. Roads were widened, and farmland sold to developers. A few construction teams began clearing brush along the old fence line in 1983. According to project foreman Ed Mallory, the machines repeatedly malfunctioned when they reached the former Hender's lot. Bulldozers stalled, compasses spun, and one operator fainted after stepping down from his cab. Mallory later told a reporter, "It's like the ground didn't want to move." Work was suspended, and the site was left untouched once again. Miriam Cates, then in her 50s, returned briefly to Waynesfield in 1984 to revisit her earlier research. Her journal from that trip records one unsettling passage. "I walked the field at dusk, soil soft underfoot, as if hollow. Heard something, like a breath behind me. But when I turned, only fog." She noted a single lily growing from the cracked earth, its stem emerging directly from a seam of old brick. She plucked it, pressed it between her notebook pages, and left the field. Weeks later, she wrote to a colleague that the flower had not decayed. "It remains pliant," she said, "as if alive." Her letter ended with one line, "I understand him now." She never clarified whom she meant. Cates passed away in 1986. Her papers were boxed à barres and sent to the university archive, but the pressed lily was missing. One archivist noted an odor emanating from the package that lingered for days. As the decade closed, the story of the grave lovers faded again into local obscurity. A few enthusiasts from Cincinnati and Cleveland visited occasionally, leaving offerings, flowers, coins, letters. One visitor wrote on a scrap of paper left at the site, "Love like this should frighten us." In 1989, during a rare drought, the outline of the old foundation reappeared through the dry grass, darker than the soil around it. Aerial photos taken by a passing survey plane captured the shape distinctly. Two adjacent rectangles, one larger, one smaller, connected by a narrow strip of ground. When printed, the darker strip formed what looked like the silhouette of two figures, one standing, one kneeling. Experts called it coincidence. Locals whispered it was memory returning to the surface. The 1990s brought renewed fascination with forgotten crimes and hauntings, and the story of the grave lovers resurfaced once more, this time through documentaries and late-night cable shows. Producers arrived in Waynesfield expecting Gothic ruins, but they found only a quiet field, overgrown and wind-worn. The landowner, an old farmer named Eli Barlow, allowed limited access, warning them not to dig. "You'll find what you don't want to," he told them. Footage from one documentary survives, a wide shot of the field at dusk, camera panning slowly toward the horizon where a single leafless tree still stood. Just as the lens steadies, a faint figure appears behind the trunk. No movement, only presence. The crew claimed it was a trick of light, but they ended the shoot before nightfall. That segment aired once in 1993 before being pulled due to viewer complaints of disturbing imagery. Around that time, an Ohio State archivist rediscovered Dr. Hart's old notes, connecting the Whitby material to the broader study of pathological mourning. In a footnote, Hart had written, "Some bonds persist beyond decay, demanding witness." It was this phrase that inspired a new generation of researchers to revisit the Waynesfield archives. Among them was historian Lydia Crane, who published a scholarly article titled "Love, Soil, and Memory: The Whitby Enigma." She noted that nearly every witness description across 8 decades included 3 constants: the smell of lilies, the sound of low humming, and the sense of being watched. Crane herself visited the site in 1995 with a small recording device. The audio captures only wind and static for several minutes before a faint voice murmurs, "She waits." Technicians later confirmed it was not Crane's voice. She never released the full tape. The following year, hikers reported finding fragments of old brass and porcelain scattered near the creek. Behind the field, one piece bore the letter W, another the shape of a heart. County maintenance crews collected the debris, but later claimed the box containing it went missing during inventory. In interviews, the workers said the metalhead felt warm to the touch. By 1998, the property was listed for sale, but attracted no buyers. Realtors complained that potential clients would stand on the porch and then suddenly refuse to enter, saying the air felt crowded. Some nights, drivers along the bypass claimed to see 2 figures standing near the tree, one bent low as if tending the earth. It was always the same image, one still, one moving, and always the faint smell of lilies carried on the wind. When the century turned, the town's population numbered fewer than 80. The field, though rarely visited, remained unchanged, untouched by weather, unclaimed by time. Those who passed said it looked the same in every season, as if the land itself refused to age. As the new millennium began, Waynesfield had almost vanished from maps. The main road was rerouted, the post office shuttered, and the cemetery, once known for its weeping angel statues, lay half buried in weeds. Yet the Henders field remained curiously untouched, owned by no one willing to cultivate it. In 2001, a group of amateur historians from Lima formed a small society called Ohio Unearthed. They visited forgotten rural sites across the state, cataloging folklore and lost architecture. When they reached Waynesfield, they found the air still and unnaturally warm for early spring. One member, Ben Jory, wrote in his journal, "The silence feels thick, like sound gets swallowed here." They set up equipment near the lone tree for an overnight watch. Their camcorder footage shows static for most of the recording, save for 1 hour near midnight, when a dim light begins to move across the frame, slow and deliberate. The next morning, they found the ground beneath their tripod disturbed, as if something had pushed upward from below. They buried the equipment rather than take it home. A week later, one of them, Angela Reel, reported waking to the smell of fresh lilies, though none were in her house. Her diary ends the following month with a line that reads, "He's still here." In 2003, a visiting author researching forgotten American hauntings attempted to locate the precise burial plots connected to the Whitby case. County maps failed to align with the terrain. It was as if the land had shifted subtly over the decades, obscuring any fixed boundaries. Locals said the graves moved with the roots. The author, interviewed later, recalled finding a fragment of stone carved with the word "remem." He left it undisturbed. Around the same time, surveyor data confirmed that the soil composition of the field differed markedly from surrounding farmland. It held higher traces of lime, the same mineral used in early 20th century embalming processes. The discovery prompted renewed speculation that remnants of the original graves or artifacts might still lie beneath. No excavation was approved. In 2005, a wildfire spread through the county, destroying dozens of acres but stopping abruptly at the Henders property line. Firefighters described the flames folding back on themselves like smoke hitting glass. The grass inside the boundary remained green. Some of the crew swore they saw a figure standing within the haze, head bowed, as if in prayer. The captain dismissed it as exhaustion, but the men who saw it refused to return to that sector. That event revived brief media interest. A local newspaper ran the headline, "The Ground That Wouldn't Burn." Residents clipped the article and pinned it in diners, as if proud their ghost had survived another century. And still, as always, people mentioned the lilies, their scent rising after each disturbance, drifting into town before fading with dawn. It seemed no matter how many years passed, the earth of Waynesfield remembered. By 2010, a century after the first reports of Harold and Eleanor Whitby, the story had become a kind of local legend retold at county fairs and school plays. Yet beneath the embellishments, the facts remained strangely consistent: the disturbed graves, the lilies, the whispered voices, and the man seen digging even after death. A centennial article in the Lima Courier revisited the case under the headline, "100 Years Beneath the Soil." The reporter, Dana Millen, wrote that the site looked ordinary, but carried a gravity, as though memory itself pressed down on the field. Millen interviewed a handful of residents still living nearby. One, an elderly woman named June Riker, remembered her grandfather's warnings. "He said that land belonged to someone who wouldn't let go," she told her. Another man, who tended the new highway rest stop just miles away, claimed he occasionally caught a whiff of funeral flowers on dry days when the wind shifts from the east. When the article was printed, readers began visiting again, small groups at dusk, teenagers with flashlights, couples taking photos by the lone tree. The sheriff's office logged several trespassing calls that summer. Most found nothing, but one caller insisted he saw a figure kneeling, digging slow, like someone planting. Deputies found only 2 parallel impressions in the soil, one larger, one smaller, and a few crushed white petals. Around this same time, a graduate student named Robert Klain, writing a dissertation on Midwest folklore, connected the Whitby legend to a broader pattern of posthumous devotion tales. He cited Dr. Hart's 1930s criminological notes and Dr. Leon Pratt's field observations, suggesting that such legends often formed when intense grief met isolation. Klain visited Waynesfield twice for his research. His second visit, in October 2012, produced a set of photographs taken just before Now's Nightfall. In one image, the shadow of the lone tree extends sharply toward the camera. In the next, taken seconds later, another shape appears beside it, human-sized, head tilted slightly as if watching. Klain dismissed it publicly as a photographic anomaly, but in a private email to his advisor he wrote, "There was humming, low but constant, coming from underfoot." He died in 2014 from pneumonia complications. His camera was returned to the university archives. The final photograph, enlarged years later, shows faint texture in the soil beneath the shadow, almost like two sets of intertwined handprints pressed into the earth. By then, the old records, the fragments, and the myths had all blurred into one. The locals said the field didn't hold a curse. It held a promise, one never broken, no matter how many decades passed. And on clear nights, when fog gathers near the creek and the moonlight fades, travelers along the road still claim to see the glimmer of a lantern swaying gently in the dark, pausing as though someone were still searching for a place to rest. In 2016, a regional museum in Lima hosted a small exhibit called Echoes Beneath the Soil, Unsolved Histories of Northwest Ohio. Among rusted farm tools and sepia photographs was a single case labeled the Whitby Collection. Inside lay the last verified relics of the case, a nameplate reading Martha Hollis, a melted glass fragment, and a yellowed copy of Dr. Hart's notes on corporeal fixation. Visitors reported an odd scent near the display. The museum staff dismissed it as floral residue from another exhibit, but one janitor later said it smelled like wet lilies. The exhibit lasted only 3 months before being quietly removed after a power failure blacked out the entire wing during closing hours. Security footage showed a dim glow flickering in the glass case seconds before the outage. The following morning, the melted glass fragment was missing. Museum records say it was misplaced during reorganization, though some employees insisted the object had simply vanished. Around that same year, a small team of local historians filmed a short documentary titled The Grave Lovers of Ohio. They recorded interviews with the few remaining families living near the Henders site. One elderly man, Amos Trent, described the field as hollow ground, saying, "When it rains, the earth hums. You can feel it if you stand still long enough." The crew filmed there for 2 nights, capturing only static and wind, until the second night, when a faint voice whispered through the microphone, indistinct yet rhythmic. The sound engineer noted the frequency matched human breath patterns. They ended the shoot before dawn. The film premiered online, but was taken down within weeks after viewers complained of disturbing audio artifacts. By then, the Henders property had been declared ecologically protected due to unique soil composition. No building permits were allowed, effectively and it from further disturbance. Locals saw it as the land defending itself. That autumn, a pair of hikers strayed from the new trail near the creek and reached the fence surrounding the field. In their statement to the sheriff's office, they claimed to see a man standing close to the tree, back turned, digging slowly as if in ritual. When they called out, the figure stopped, then faded into mist. Deputies investigated the next morning and found a single patch of disturbed soil about 4 feet wide, with a cluster of white lilies sprouting from the center. The roots were impossibly deep for that time of year. Samples sent for analysis returned inconclusive, containing trace formaldehyde and lime, materials no longer used in modern embalming. The case file was marked unexplained. The sheriff's final note read simply, "Ground active." The folder remains sealed in county archives. Residents who drive past at night say the land glows faintly when lightning flashes in the distance, as if the soil remembers where to breathe. By 2019, the legend had once again slipped into quiet obscurity, remembered only by local historians and the occasional wanderer drawn by curiosity. Yet the field refused complete silence. A journalist for an independent online magazine, Rust Belt Mysteries, returned to Waynesfield that spring to document what she called the last living folklore of western Ohio. Her report describes the Henders property as eerily preserved, noting that while the surrounding farmland had shifted through seasons of drought and flood, the soil within the old fence line remained unchanged. She wrote, "Grass grows, but never taller than a hand. The lilies bloom, but never wilt. And when wind passes, it hums through the stems like breath." Her article featured interviews with county officials who denied any haunting, yet admitted they never entered the field after dark. One deputy confessed anonymously, "We hear it sometimes. Sounds like a shovel dragging." The journalist also uncovered an overlooked connection in state archives, a 1911 telegram from Sheriff Darnell to a coroner in Lima, reading only, "Second body found under same nameplate. Request quiet removal." no record of that second body remains. When the article was published online, readers flooded the comments with personal stories, claims of strange dreams, sudden scents of flowers, even flickering lights in their homes after viewing the photos. The editor dismissed it as suggestive hysteria, yet within weeks the website was taken offline following unexplained data corruption that erased the entire feature. In that same year, a drone hobbyist filmed the area during an overcast afternoon. His footage, later uploaded to a small history forum, shows the tree line from above. For several seconds, the ground appears to pulse, shadows shifting, earth subtly rising and settling again, as though something beneath were moving in slow rhythm. The poster deleted the video within hours. Those who saved copies claim that when the clip is played at half speed, a faint human silhouette becomes visible beneath the soil, curled close to another. Around this time, a team from the Ohio Historical Survey proposed placing a marker on the site to deter trespassers, but the application was denied. The reason listed in the minutes: land ownership indeterminate. Somehow, the deeds had vanished. No county record could confirm who legally possessed the field. It existed without title, claimed only by itself. Locals joked that maybe Harold had finally bought it in death. The town, now a scattering of homes, avoided speaking of it, yet truckers passing through still reported the same thing: a single light swaying deep among the grass near the old tree, unmoving yet alive. They say if you stop and listen, you'll hear faint humming, two voices low and patient, as though they're still finishing what they started long ago. When the 21st century turned its second decade, there was little left of Waynesfield beyond a scattering of foundations and the old signpost rusting at the crossroads. The church had long collapsed. Its stones were taken for garden walls. Yet the Hendersfield remained untouched, its boundaries held by an invisible accord. Satellite imagery from 2021 still shows it, an oval darker than the fields around it, unplowed, unclaimed. During a storm that year, a maintenance worker repairing power lines nearby captured a photograph of lightning striking close to the lone tree. In the image, light flares through the rain, illuminating two faint shapes beside the trunk, one standing upright, the other crouched low. The worker said he hadn't seen anyone there with his eyes. When he returned the next morning, the grass around the tree was scorched, except for a perfect circle of fresh lilies. Later that summer, a local teacher named Helen Avery began gathering oral histories from the few remaining residents. She described their tone as reverent rather than fearful. "They don't think it's cursed," she wrote, "only faithful." One man told her, "The ground keeps its promises. That's all." Her notes, stored at the regional archive, conclude with a reflection that feels almost like a prayer. If love has a half-life, perhaps it measures in centuries. No new disturbances have been recorded since, though motorists occasionally stop along the bypass to take photographs. None show anything conclusive, just mist, tree, field. Yet those who linger long enough insist they hear a soft rhythm under the wind, like someone quietly shoveling earth. In the end, the Whitby's story never found resolution. The county's last mention of them remains a single notation in the property ledger: occupants removed 1910. But the absence of record may be the truest record of all, as Dr. Hart once wrote. In his closing thesis, the body returns to dust, but dust remembers form. His words, meant as science, now read like prophecy. For more than 100 years, that corner of Ohio has carried the breath of a promise made between grief and devotion, between silence and the soil itself. Travelers who pass through after dusk still describe the same sight, a faint glow near the tree, flickering as though guided by a human hand. It never wanders, never fades, only sways in time with the heartbeat of the earth. They say, if you listen closely, you can hear two voices murmuring below the wind, one man, one woman, locked forever in their quiet labor, tending the ground they could never leave. And so the story of the grave lovers of Ohio ends as it began, with the soil of Waynesfield breathing softly beneath the lilies, remembering what love once buried and could not forget.